Excellent. Thank you, Jen, for that. And welcome everyone for the call. Hope you're all safe and sound and relaxed at home or in a quiet space in the office. So look, obviously for my title, talking about packaging sustainability, and certainly it's one that's going to be a hot topic for a few years to come, thankfully, and really going beyond bio and towards a more partnered system design approach, and really just getting a chance to highlight some examples of where it goes beyond one entity, one brand, one person to develop a solution. But certainly the approach is around collaboration and working as teams. So I'll get into a quick rundown about myself, and Jen's done a wonderful job to touch on that already, so I won't spend on too much time here. But yeah, industrial design background. I run a couple of companies, one specialising on packaging, and also one that looks a bit around customer experience and service design. So by the end of this session, you'll get a sense of how important system design is and the service aspect of that. And you can see they're quite strongly interlinked, and probably more so now than ever in relation to that. So we certainly develop product from really the insights part. So those who are in marketing, those who work with consumer science, understand that unmet need from a consumer. We convert that into an insight, and then we develop that along the chain from conceptual to visualizations to physical 3D structures, and develop all the development tooling, designs, right through to manufacturing. So here's a bit of a short sample of ones that I've been involved with, all predominantly involved with the physical structure and developing that product from design through to market. And on the service side of things, this is really getting into understanding, again, the consumer research, but that wayfinding, that journey that consumers go through. It could be happening at back of house at a QSR restaurant. It could be the way that you run your plant and your services through your plant, all the way that your product is delivered, interacted with the consumer. So part of that is understand that journey, very, very high on EQ, and understanding that those service touch points, and how we can make that a streamlined and frictionless process, which we all get to enjoy with many of our technology tools today. So that's the second part of the business. As far as the thinking behind it, and you'll see this applied across many different examples throughout the session, but really, again, touching on consumer insights, understand that need state or the job to be done, and what that term becomes as a provocation, really making sure that we engage the consumer's functional needs as well as their emotional desires. So that sort of pull to desire you to open your wallet, part with money, and buy into your brand and your promise. In order to get cut through innovation, we definitely look outside our industry, so don't really get focused with the blinkers on, going into categories, looking at competitive set only, and having a look at what other people are doing in our particular category. We go well beyond that and look into other sectors, aligned industries, aligned technologies, and look for inspiration and focus on the job to be done as a way to break through. We're certainly very big on watch what people do, not what they say. Not a big fan of focus groups. And I learn a lot more by watching what people do in the field, to the shortcuts, the workarounds, why people are doing those things, and how we can actually deliver that seamless experience to them in an end product. And lastly, obviously making sure that whatever concept, insight, design we've created, to ensure that everyone has access to it. And I have an example of where that has actually been forgotten in the pursuit of making something recyclable. And I've got a bit of a slide on that, which I haven't given to you in the deck, but I will cover in the presentation today. And the journey we go through is a process that is known as design thinking around the world, but really I'll highlight the key point, which is about empathy. Most approaches for development, R&D, start with the ideation, step 3, giving a sketch, build something, make something. Nothing wrong with that, but at some point in time, you have to understand the why, understand the job to be done, have the ability to look through someone else's eyes, sit in someone's chair and stand in someone's shoes. And that's where empathy comes into play. And you'll find as we go through some of the examples, empathy does play a big role, especially when we start looking at the circular models and reuse models at play as well. So that's the linear version, which we're all sort of used to. And this is a reality. This is how it looks like in field when it happens, madness, the pressure, the trade launches, all trying to get things done, and usually having step 5 ready before step 1's ready to go. And you still go through this iterative process. This is a reality of how we approach things. So that's the background of how we think. Now look at the lens of what sustainability means to a brand. And these are some of the quotes and cues that I get on a regular basis when I'm dealing with most of my clients. Again, we want it to be unique. Whatever they're putting forward on a sustainability platform, they want to make sure it reflects their brand, it's about them, and their brand is interlinked with that offer. We want a green solution. What does that mean? Is it an anti-plastic platform? Is it pro-paper? Is it pro-compostable? That really takes a whole different veneer, but we want it to be a green solution. We want it compostable. There's all the yell-outs we get from our customers. We want it to be in paper. That's really environmentally friendly. And we definitely want not to have any plastic. It's got to be plastic-free, because we all know plastic is bad from everything that's being told in the media. Thankfully, those in the industry believe that's not to be true. And not all plastic is bad, but there is a purpose, and it's being smart and selective with that material. We want it to be recyclable, but still want that higher barrier. I want my cheese block to go off and be passing through the supply chain and last 12 months on shelf in delivery. Make sure it's all gas flush and I have multiple layers of the film on there. But it doesn't really help at all when it comes to recyclability. So how do we find that sweet spot between there? Of course, we all want it yesterday. Today is way too late already. And ideally, we want it to be cheaper than current. This is pretty much my brief that I get on most of my projects on a day-to-day basis. And the reality is many of the brands that I've worked with tend to work to this. And it's really a struggle to understand what they want to achieve, but also what they feel consumers are actually asking for them. So as we move on from here, we start to understand, what does this all mean to us? And we're really in quite a challenging world and have been for a number of years. And, the IPCC report that landed only yesterday has certainly put this alarm bell another few notches up on the belt, certainly showing the influence that we've had as a human race and the way that we feed our consumerism, the way that we grow and we actually have our society structured is not quite working for our domain and our abode that we call Earth. So we need to make some changes and fundamental changes, not tweaking around the edges, but making some fundamental changes. And I used this slide, I think, in a presentation with Dairy Australia last year for 2020. And this basically gives an example of essentially how much of the Earth's resources we would use if we lived like a particular country. And last year in 2020, if the whole world lived as we get to enjoy as Australians, we would have used up the entire world's resources by March 27th. Sadly, in 2021, we haven't gotten any better, we've actually gotten worse. We would have used up the world's resources by March 22nd, so it's getting shorter each time. So it really puts to bed the understanding about how we should live our life, considerate of the planet we've got and the resources that it can actually produce. So this is quite a startling figure, and I've got links for all these sites and data in the bottom right corner on the hyperlink for your presentation as well. As we know, the battle is about the population. How do we support? How do we feed? How do we keep hydrated? Almost 10 billion people within another less than 30 years, essentially. We already know water availability is scarce, especially when you look at Australia. Yet the demand is quite high, and that'll only increase as urban populations spread out from rural. We have a huge increase from those that are in third world or developing countries becoming middle class and hyper-developed countries. We've seen that happen in India, we've seen that happen in China, we've seen that happen in some areas in Indonesia, as well as in Africa as well. So we'll start to put a greater demand on the system, and that is the Earth system to provide nutrients to us as humans. And of course, where do all the flows come from? We look across the entire supply chain, the energy demands to transport things, the land occupation to grow crops, to either feed humans or grow crops for bioplastics or fuel. And what happens with all those end products as solid waste, occupying many parts of the world which only rely on landfill. So we have all these challenges that are thrown towards us, and we play a role in that in all of our different positions, our jobs that we have on our business cards and the caps that we wear. And all of that with scale comes down to packaging waste. As we have this growing consumerism, this growing population, this growing urban life that relies on things being delivered on demand, everything conveniently packed, there's an explosion of packaging formats, and therefore that leads to waste. So how do we start sorting through that and doing the best we can with the energy and the land and the resources we've mined, we've processed, and actually making the most of that once it actually is in our hands? So that's the challenge what people see. But for me as a packaging person, as a design person, I also understand quite strongly that packaging does have an important function, and that comes down to food waste in particular. When we start to look at areas that are high intensive in agriculture, like meat, fish and eggs, dairy, fruit, vegetables and nuts, we find the packaging component, although we all see it, people go into stores and see plastic wrapped around produce, plastic wrapped around meat, and say, well, okay, why is this all here, especially produce in particular? When you look at it, the actual impact of the energy required to produce the packaging format is quite small when compared to the amount of energy required to deliver that consumed food. And then when you start to measure against the waste that goes that area, produce is a quiet example, they're at 22%. So the climate impact really is larger for food wasted than for that with packaging. So it's just trying to put a bit of context of where things sit on that front. If we drill down a bit more and now focus on the packaging medium, as Australia, this is data that we've received from ATCO, and I'm making the assumption here that everyone here is well aware of who the Australian Packaging Covenant is. Hopefully you're all signed up to it. You all have your own action plans and you use a plethora of their tools to help you make wise decisions in your organisation. But if you don't, here's a quick overview. And the top line there is 5.5 million tonnes of packaging consumption that we have, going back to that earlier slide. As we drill down, we start to look down and say, okay, well, how much do we recover from that? So just less than half, 49%, we actually recover. So we've got 80, 90% of our collection systems spread around the nation. So we haven't got really any excuse not be able to find a bin to put it in correctly. Yet we still only recover half of the packaging that's actually produced. And out of that half, as far as what we collect from a plastic side, we only collect 16% of the collected item is actually plastic we can actually collect and therefore find a use for or recycle and put it back into the system. Yet we realise that out of everything we put out into the marketplace, 86% of it is actually recyclable. So there's a massive gap between the 86% that actually is recyclable to the 16% we actually collect. And what we're trying to do is find a way to sort of lift that 16% towards that 86, then close that gap. And as always, I like to cross-check my data. So this is, again, looking at plastic material recycling rates from a different source. This is the Plastic Recycling Survey. And again, breaking it up in the order of just focusing around plastics here, not looking at papers and tins and so on as a previous slide, but zoning in on plastics in particular. And then again, ranking them into the plastic identification code from 1 to 6, and then 7 being other. And all those that are green are what we class as readily recyclable. So if it's delivered to a MRF, it can be sorted, baled, sent off to a plastic recycling facility, and the value that's captured that material, if it's clean and good quality, can be repurposed, sent back and used for other products or other packaging needs. So trying to create a bit of a loop to that system. And then obviously the red, those that are not recyclable or currently or about to be banned in particular, and those that are unable to be recycled. So your bioplastic, for instance, really can't be recycled. It's essentially going to industrial or home composting, but they are still classed as plastic. What's interesting though, is again, looking at those numbers, the readily recycled materials, 16% of our recycled plastics are actually recovered, which verify the previous number. So we've got a very small amount of capture through there. So how do we actually improve that recycling rate? How do we actually improve the capture and rework of that material? So we want to know, what is our industry doing to address some of these challenges? So again, I won't dwell on this because I'm making the assumption that you're all ATCO citizens. You're all using the 10 packaging guidelines they've got and sustainability packaging guidelines to help you make wise decisions about how you develop your packaging. And you ask yourself these pertinent questions. I'm not going to go through them for the sake of the presentation. You have the deck. These are really good questions to ask yourself in your own packaging line and see where you've got a roadblock, where you have a challenge, where you have an uncomfortable moment. And what can you do as a developer, as a brand owner, as a business owner, as a packaging tech or marketer, what you can do to change the outcome and improve the outcome. So some of the tools that ATCO provide you is PREP. So it's a packaging recycling evaluation portal. It's an online tool that basically mimics what happens at a MRF. And you put in attributes and parameters about your packaging format, and it will tell you whether it's a green light and therefore it can be recycled, or if it's a red light and it can't be recycled, and give you the reason why to make a change. Once you're informed with that, it'll then use the ARL or the Australian Recycling Label to help you inform your consumers the correct behaviour and the correct action to improve the chance of that package to be recycled. So all these items tend to work in harmony to increase that 16% closer to 89% we've actually got coming out in the field. So again, trying to close that gap, trying to capture that material value that we've mined the earth for to create, and making sure that goes round and round again to create other products that we might require for our lives that are so convenience driven. One of the tools I'll focus on, and the tool I'll focus on here, is design for recovery. Now, this is the old waste hierarchy, which I tend to use for most of my clients, no matter really how advanced and au fait they are with regards to sustainability, or they're coming in at a very low level where everything just has to be compostable or made from paper. So this is a really good way to understand what we're aiming for. And obviously we've got a lot of products sitting in predominantly landfill. We're aiming towards recyclable. What else can we actually do to lift it up that chain and ideally aim towards avoidance or reduction, but possibly landing on reuse? Now, this has been around since the mid-60s. Ad Lansik was a Finnish politician who developed it, but times have changed. So I've sort of reworked this in a way to understand it from a circular lens. And what I'm looking at from here is understanding essentially the amount of uses that I might get from a package, and then what might that equate to in relation to an impact into the environment. So obviously that top level, avoidance reduction on the far left, that really means zero packaging. Think of refill models, for instance, the classic example. Well, they have no impact because there actually is no packaging required. You might have one item, you go in and you constantly use that to refill. So it's zero packaging delivery. As you work down the next level, you've got reuse. So again, we're aiming towards a maximum use. You create a widget and you use that more than one time, hopefully more than 10 times, hopefully more than 30 times. And then by doing that, we've reduced the amount of impact to produce that package. You mine it once, you use it once, and then essentially once it's produced, you use it many, many times over. Example, I have an old Cappy bottle here, which I've refashioned into a water beaker. And I've had that for a couple of years now. One bottle hasn't been thrown out, but reused several times. And as we go through, as you look down that hierarchy, you can see on the left, the amount of usages start to reduce, but then the impact as well on the side starts to actually have an impact as well, until a point where you get to recycling, to organics recycling, where now we're really switching to essentially single use. You make something which is compostable, its destination is either to an industrial composter, which doesn't really exist in our infrastructure, or to a home composting, if all the conditions are correct. But once it's there, it goes nowhere else. It'll become a carbon-based organic material, hopefully adding nutrients into your soil for best case scenario. But it's one step and you're expanding the value. You're expanding the value in that particular process. The one rung below, again, single use, it's waste to energy, which is prevalent predominantly in the Western Europe regions, not so much here in Australia. And obviously the last part is single use and zero value. So it's that cause and effect and looking at it for understanding about how much energy do I use to create this part, and how do I keep this in the system, the material value in the system as long as possible. So think about that when you start to look at waste hierarchy and your role and where you want your product to land. This is what the federal government's doing. So again, essentially running in hand with regards to our national plastic plan. They're targeting some really pertinent issues that are single-use plastics or problematic materials we've had in the marketplace for a number of years, which is a great initiative. And as you can see here, I've highlighted about 3 or 4 bands here with all green across, which really are where all the states are aligned to really start to phase out these materials, being around degradable plastics, plastic straws, utensils and stirrers, food containers, EPS and EPS good packaging. So really having the collection of all the states under a federal mandate to start to address and remove single-use plastic out of the stream. Why? High chance for litter, adding real no value in the supply chain ideally. Some products do get mixed in there that have some barrier shelf life, but really things that can be moved towards either, again, a non-plastic format, if it's warranted, a compostable format, if it's heavily contained with food, or ideally a reuse model where it can be stepped in the system and reduce the amount of repeat use of materials and raw energy requirements. What the retailers doing, they're helping drive this message through the consumers. So consumers are educated by the actions of where they shop. So here on the left, we have Woolworths. We've created this traffic light system they've provided to all their supply chain. So essentially, if you're providing a product into Woolworths, you have essentially a scorecard that you need to aim towards. The balance for you as a brand owner is what do you do with things that have a particular shelf life or might have high levels of food contamination or might require oxygen scavenging requirements or might require gas flushing? How do you fit into this area? And what do you do to shift from, say, an amber to a green? Or do you look for different models if you're limited in both material or you're limited in options for shelf life reduction? If we look at Coles, for instance, they're going beyond just the packaging, but they're looking at their entire business model, looking at where they're sourcing their power from, how they do their recycling, their packaging, you know, the logos, everything about their ethos and touch point is saying, how do we become greener and net zero by 2025? So by having large brands like this that have huge reach, huge recognition nationally, they start to plant these things in the consumer's minds. So education is happening from many, many fronts. Moving forward, I've touched on the PrEP and ARL earlier, but again, it's an on-pack information portal, which replaces what we used to always see, used to always call the recycle logo, which actually is called the PIC, or the plastic identification code, nothing to do with recycling. This tool here is a communication tool that informs consumers how best to dispose or recycle that product in a way to ensure it is actually recycled. So maybe putting a cap onto a bottle because a cap will most likely not get recycled because it's too small, or flattening the box. If a box goes through and it's seen as a 3D object, it bounces, it gets put in the plastic stream, it's seen it's not plastic, and it goes to landfill for a product which can be 100% recycled. So it's doing some small actions, and this is basically a symbology that comes through and helps navigate consumers' ways for making informed decisions. And here's a good example of where prep can be used to change design. On the left is a PVC juice bottle. I actually worked on designing this particular product for Kraft Heinz. Great product with regards to ergonomics, usability, and brand presence, but obviously it's PVC, which as we know is a banned material. I run it through prep, it's not recyclable. Why we go with PVC? Well, you can only make a handled bottle that's clear out of PVC. You can't do it in PET with equipment and material limitations in this country. So now moving forward, we want to try and be making sure materials are recyclable, PVC is being banned, that informed a design change. So now the bottle on the right has been designed by Heinz, that basically is sans handle, no handle required. It's made without a handle and therefore can be produced out of PET, which means, hey, it does get an orange light just because the label contamination with the material, but it's a far better solution which gives you high value retention of your PET. So this is an example of where you can use a prep tool to help inform shift from material, maybe shift from process, and certainly, as you can see here, quite a significant shift in the design attributes as well. One word of warning, if you are using a prep tool to help this, always consider what the net output's going to be of your design. So here we've gone from a handle product holding 2 litres juice to a non-handle product with a grip holding 2 litres juice. What does that do to the way that you interact, engage, and use that product? How would someone who's got limited motor skills be able to pour and interact with that particular product? So this is an example where it works. This is when it doesn't. So when you've made this complete shift, all driven by recyclability, but forgotten to take the consumer's needs along for the journey and being totally driven by recyclability. And we all know now, because we're in a connected world, that consumers don't really hold back when they want to sort of share how they feel about a change you may have made as a brand owner. And here's some examples I do want to put on the deck, but at least show you what can happen if you just solely focus on recyclability. So yes, make the changes, but don't forget, you've got to bring the consumer along for the journey, and certainly consider that in your design changes as well. Moving on, soft plastics, huge challenge for many of us, especially those in the cheese area, whey powder bags and so on, always a problem. And so Red Cycle pretty much has been around for plus 10 years. It does require a call to action for us as consumers to basically collect at home, be diligent, put it in a bag, and then make that journey. Remember to take it back to store to dispense either Coles or Woolies. So the percentages of collection are in the single digits percentage. So is there a system? Yes. Is there a model where it takes it from a plastic bag you see on the top right with the Allen's bag? And then as you can see on that green and red box, we have a select amount of materials that are pass, that can get through as you go, and you have more complex materials that are more challenging to handle in different percentage loads that are definitely out of context we can actually use. But the end regards that you take that material, huge amount of yield required, of course, to produce a small product, and then you convert it across to a one-step item. So it might be a bench, a bollard, a table, and so on. But again, we're using a source that would normally go to landfill, we're collecting it and then sending it off to an end product. But it's a one-step move. So it's a capped amount of use if I go back that waste hierarchy in the past. We are recycling, but it's not repetitive recycling. It might stay as a bench for another 30, 40 years before it gets recycled again. We're talking about keeping it in there for a longer period of time and reworking it. But again, the reality is it's complex. Complex structures doing very complex jobs of shelf life management, and we're relying on consumers to take things back to store, and we're talking single-digit retention of this product. So it's a system, but it's not enough to us to get from 16% to 89%. We want to try and take that complexity out. So again, we've got very complex structures. They're not recyclable, so we've got lost value. We want to make that shift from where we've got an accepted compromised performance, a bit on reduction of barrier, be it reduction of shelf life. It could be a compromise on yield and cost of the item as well. But there's going to be some compromise across the board in order to go from complex structure to a more simple structure, to monopolyethylene structures or mono PP structures, where we basically have a chance to retain the value of that material into the system while it's still doing a primary job to protect the the product through the supply chain as the package. So if we take this and look at the next step, the roll-on recycle is a recent venture which has been developed. Anthony Payton, who developed PrEP, in the last few years, has been working on this particular idea, but getting some traction the last year. Brook Farm, which you can see there on the image, is an example of probably his first commercial launch. The benefit here is that we've worked now with a flexible structure, which is a monomaterial. So it's polyethylene based. The barrier attributes are still present, but not as high as an extreme level that might have a PVDC or EVOH layer. This has EVOH, but it has 5%. And 5% EVOH with the bulk load of polyethylene still classes recyclable at that very, very low percentage. So you can do the same with polypropylene as well. So now you've got a flexible film that you can technically, you've now simplified, technically recycle, but of course, only if you change the form. Because if it goes in flat, when it gets delivered to a MRF, when it goes through the bounce conveyor, it doesn't bounce because it's flat, it's got no density. So it goes down the conveyor belt. And what else goes down there is paper. So when it gets delivered to the paper stream, it's realised it's plastic, it'll be sorted out, sent to landfill. So part of the change here and the call to action to the consumer is roll it up. You make it like a roll, like a 6, you use the tape on the far right of the image tree here, and then you place it in the bin. Now when that goes through, and it has been tested, it bounces. It bounces like a 3D object, it goes in a plastic stream, it's identified for the wash bath as polyethylene, get collected with polyethylene products in the plastic recycling facility, and therefore it comes back as another bag, a bottle cap, a bottle. So it has a second life. That material that we've been mined, we've resourced, that raw material has been captured and put back in the system. But more importantly, that friction between the consumer having to make a journey, be conscious of their movement, has been reduced because it's still the same action me putting stuff in curbside recycling. All I have to do, because PrEP's telling me and the ARL's telling me, is roll it, stick it and put it in. So it's a less friction, therefore a higher chance of me as a human to actually do that job to make a significant change, and a better chance of me to get 16% up higher again. So again, that's available right now. So when you've got a range in your product which you can potentially move to a monostructure, this might be a vehicle to use to not rely on, say, just a recycle as your only option you've got for soft plastics. Looking forward, there are some options coming ahead, which thankfully are some plans. This is where we now come to that sort of partnered system. So it's going beyond one party, one person with a great idea relying on the industry to roll it out, but now a collection of parts to come together to make fundamental change. So here we're looking at advanced recycling or chemical recycling. So Licella, again, for those that have been across the industry or well across the news waves on this last 2 or 3 years, and essentially they essentially break down the collector soft plastics to a reworkable oil that essentially is now becoming the base polymer to go off and produce more plastic. So from this point of view, we've got the likes of Coles, Linden Bassell, IQ Renew, which is the family of Licella, and Nestle, all working together to create what will be Australia's first advanced recycling facility. And so this is really, again, trying to make a larger dent into reduce the amount of soft plastics going to landfill and capturing in the system, hopefully at curbside, as it was tested with Nestle and IQ a couple of years back, to again reduce the friction for consumers to lose this at landfill. So again, increasing our chance to capture it and increase our chance to look at a very high valuable material. Moving beyond that is again working with post-consumer recycled materials. Now there are a number of brands and products out there selling recycled content in their product. I can go to OF and pick up a pouch that's got 40% recycled content. Most of that, if not all of that, is essentially in manufacturing recycled content. So off-cut, trim, webbing that's been reground on site, recompounded, put back in the hopper through the extruder, and you have the same product. It's all done within the same walls of the manufacturing. So this challenge here is getting what we throw out, what's being collected, that 16%, sorting it to what might be polypropylene as an example here with NextLoop PP, grabbing that material, reprocessing it down again to the base monopolymer, and then using that raw oil and process and flake to go off and produce a new product, and making sure, of course, it's food safe. So Ed Koiser here has been doing the industry for the last 30, 40 years in this game, has got, again, a collection of major brands around the world to start driving that post-consumer recycled material back into core products. And Trays, I know Sealed Air is doing it locally and starting to push that forward, but really trying to use PP, which is the more dominant of the materials and quite a universal and friendly material, as a way to reduce and cut into that waste and raise the percentage of reused material. And some of the tools they're using as well as helping making recycling a little bit smarter. Again, we know it's fairly agricultural, but here again, Nextech have been involved with Ed and the team. You've got companies like Wrap and Closed Loop, and major brands here again like P&G, PepsiCo, and Nestle, all working together to see how can they do their part to make the sorting and sifting of our packaging waste we put forward easy to identify, easy to sort correctly, and therefore increase the chance of funneling that material down the correct stream as a single stream in our commingled recycling facility, so we can actually capture the value and reuse that material. So here they've gone off and looking to use either chemical traces or digital watermarks. Probably one of the media has been, probably the last year or so, has been with black products, black trays, black lids, being carbon black. We can't pick them up, or the near infrared sensors cannot pick them up on the conveyor belt. So they can put traces in there, so it actually looks fluorescent on the line. The camera sees it, picks it as an object on a conveyor belt, and can actually sort it out once it gets to a plastic recycling facility. If it happens beforehand, it tends to get missed again. So these are other additions that we can look at. If we consider beverage bottles, in particular, high use of shrink sleeve containers, here's a great chance to add that dye and essentially get a near 100% strike rate. So now it's very much hitting this, we're talking single digit collection, but pushing towards 100%. So if you can imagine we do all these various things from advanced recycling, smart recycling sensors, post-consumer recycling collection of polypropylene, you've got the roll and recycle as well, all coupled with, say, the red cycle. We start to look at all these materials and these formats in soft plastics. Over the next couple of years in particular, when these start to come online at scale, we start to realise that gap starts to close. The increase that we gather, the fidelity of what we get in the waste stream is increased, and therefore we've now got a supply chain coming from non-virgin based materials, and therefore reducing the amount of use that I showed on those earlier slides at the start. But again, all of these fall under one umbrella, which is about recycling, which is sitting out in that sort of third and fourth band on the waste hierarchy, not quite towards the top, with that reuse and basically avoid is probably the part when I really try and hit. This is all under recycling. And that really is, I guess, the key thesis here. This is a great comment here from Tom Zaki from TerraCycle. Again, that we just can't keep recycling our way out of this garbage crisis. We do require a fundamental change in how we work the system in order to actually make huge leaps into what we're doing and actually cut through into reducing these impacts at climate level. So again, I'm making the assumption that many of those on the call are well aware of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. They're well aware of the circular model, moving from linear through reuse into a circular model. And again, trying to keep that value in the system. So I'll make that assumption. And again, if you're not across that in detail, I have provided you some links on this slide. And what I'll do is I'll take a break so I can have a bit of a drink. I have a short video here of Tom Sarsny from TerraCycle talking about that circular model, and in particular Loop and his brand, which we know has been brought to our shores via Woolworths and has already been rolled out into some of the locations already.
Tom Zaki is on a mission to eliminate the concept of waste.
The act of throwing something away in itself isn't bad. It's actually incredibly convenient. The problem is where it ends up.
And it's a big problem. About 91% of plastic waste ever created has never been recycled. So Zaki decided to go to the source, to target the companies making the kind of single-use plastic containers that constantly end up in the trash. And he started with the 4 largest consumer goods companies in the world. Combined, their sales totaled almost $285 billion in 2018.
We went to all these major companies saying, here's this new big idea, come take a risk on it, and let's ideally change the world in the process.
He called the big idea Loop. His pitch to consumers: buy the same household products you already love plus a small deposit, and we'll send them to you in durable, reusable packaging. When you're done, return them to be cleaned, refilled, and reused by someone else. How hard of a sell was this to manufacturers and companies?
Loop is a gargantuan ask because we're going into a Procter & Gamble and saying, reinvent the packaging of these world-famous products completely. Build production lines to fill this reinvented package. Oh, and by the way, I have no proof that anyone's going to buy them. But they said yes because they know that there's a garbage crisis and they really don't want to contribute to it.
And Nestle didn't need much convincing.
We've invested so much time, energy, people resources, and dollars because as we think forward to the future, we know consumers will demand more recyclable products, more reusable products. And so Project Loop is a way for us to tip our toe into this territory and really learn a lot.
In the end, Nestle, along with Procter & Gamble, PepsiCo, Unilever, Clorox, and others, took the leap.
Loop is an ecosystem. If it was just one company making a few products, it wouldn't work. You need everyone coming together. And it sort of became this sort of, snowball effect where as it got bigger, more and more companies joined even faster and faster.
Loop launched in early 2019 in a few cities with about 300 products. Since then, Zaki says more than 10,000 people have signed up. It's expanding to more cities as well. And soon the products will be available in major retailers like Walgreens and Kroger.
What's neat is you can buy it at one retailer and return it to another. So it really creates this nice network effect. We're adding a brand every day. And so, things you'll see are from pet products to automotive products, not just one type of shampoo, but a dozen different types of shampoo, and everything will be growing and pushing each other.
We still don't know if Loop will catch on. What do you think has to change in regards to the consumer's mindset in order for them to adopt this new model you're proposing?
I believe that asking the consumer to change anything is an uphill battle. I think it's much easier to ask the model what it can do to match the convenience the consumer wants. Loop is not the first refill idea at all, but none of them have really taken off. And I would argue it's because it's less convenient to the consumer than throw it away and buy a new one. The more we make it feel like a disposable lifestyle, the easier it will be to get mass adoption.
And that mass adoption, that's really key here.
It's everything. I think a lot of people are going to think about whether there's a future of reuse by whether we succeed. Because all the world's major manufacturers are saying, we're going to give it a shot. And Loop is their shot.
Okay, so I kept a line there which you said towards the end. The more we make it feel like a disposable lifestyle, the easier it will be to get mass adoption. I mentioned before about seamless, frictionless, that service generally like to, when you hop on your phone, you're into an app, you want your banking experience to be seamless. You want your ordering your tickets to the football game to be seamless. So again, consumers don't like effort. We're lazy beasts by nature. For us to put in a flexible packaging in a bag and walk into our car and drive somewhere to drop it off to be recycled or walk across the road, in my case, is still a chore. If you make it seamless, but if you make it, from my point of view, still disposable, I'm likely to stick with it. So this is the key thing, is reducing that friction through there. And the other point he did make there as well is the fact that if he was doing it by himself as a one single brand pushing, it would never work. It was basically done as a collection of groups. So that's another part of that partnered system approach as well. So if we start to look back at, comparing what their product is in our traditional disposable plastic containers, we start looking at Loop's containers as an example. They're classed as environmentally neutral after 3 uses. And after 7 uses, the reusable container has a 74% less impact on the environment than a disposable one. So we did talk about durability, and we spoke about the fact that we've got stainless steel containers, heavyweight, a lot more material. And if we were to do an LCA of that, life cycle assessment of that, the raw energy and impact from a carbon gas point of view would probably be 10-fold, 20-fold what it would be for our current packaging format. Difference is that fraction used for the current packaging format is used once and once only. But if you have a large amount and you keep chopping in for every single use, at a certain point in time, you hit break even. And at break even, you'll then surpass. And that's the key thing, is keeping something in the environment, making it durable and therefore desirable. With an image on the back on the far right there about the old milk bottles. I remember the Slade's bottles being delivered in the back of a truck when I was a kid. And in Asia as well, the bottles are made 4 times the weight we have here. Why? Because they collect them, they wash them and reuse them back into the system. They don't constantly have lightweight bottles. But again, if I look at the Loop model, they demand each pack employs at least 30 times before it's recycled, and is only recycled back into the original product. So again, if you go back to the waste hierarchy slide, we're now going another rung up. We're hitting reuse and we're trying to recycle back into the same product, not recycling it back into a park bench or recycling it back into some PVC piping. It comes in as an ice cream container, it comes back as an ice cream container. And that's the key thing as well. So look at the paradigm shift in the commercials behind it. On the far left is a typical COGS analysis for a brand. It's 10 cents, procurement get involved and make sure that price point's correct, but it's one use and it's all about that price. And they might want to drive that sale, I want to make it 8 cents, or maybe even 7 cents. But each time you get it, it's used once and it's thrown out. There's a set amount of embodied energy that's been required to create that one pack of Axe, and it's repeated on every single pack that's produced. But now, if you look across something more durable, and now as an industrial designer, we were trained to design things that are desirable. We're now increasing consumer delight. We're now creating an asset to the brand. Yes, it might be 4 or 5 times the weight. It might be more complicated to produce tooling wise, but it is now more durable. It's going to last a lot longer, and it's going to cost $3. Why would you go from 10 cents to $3? But hey, I'm getting 100 uses from this product. Now, end cost is 3 cents. Well, I can have 3 of these for the cost of 1 over there. But you think about the embodied energy, there may have been probably triple the embodied energy that was required on the left pack, which is a single use, to make the one on the right, which is 100 uses. But it's been used once. And you divide that by 100 and you compare, suddenly the actual environmental impact for the more durable pack is far less than that on the single use pack. That is essentially the model for aiming towards durability and reusability to reduce the environmental impact. Further evidence of that is here with Heineken. They looked at reusable and single cups for their events and actually gave a program report, and I have a link for that on the slide as well. And they measured out on the far left, in that top image, you can see 4 out of 5 stars on sustainability performance for a reusable cup versus pretty much 0 stars on sustainability performance for a single-use cup. And if you look at the graph down below, you'll see these very sharp lines at the very top going up towards 100. That's basically the carbon gases used to actually produce a product, and all those high spikes relate to a reusable cup format, be it steel, be it polycarbonate, be it Triton PP or a composite material. They're all high load on that first cup. But as we see, after 10 uses with those cups, they actually break even across the board compared to a single cup. And when you get to 25 uses, it's actually a net gain across the board. So again, their recommendation is where you can stick with a reusable system. And those items like paper and biodegradable cups actually come up not that great when you look at the actual report as well. So that's another example from that side. One more here, which I've just kept for this presentation, not for what the deck that you have. This is an EPS box. We know EPS has been banned. This is for sending seafood packaging around distribution, versus a polypropylene box in 2 different thicknesses versus a cardboard biodegradable compostable version. And for one use, as you can see, EPS trumps both the PP option as well as the cardboard composite option. Cardboard composite is surprisingly quite high because of the land use and the water use for the product in a particular case. But again, if we look at when you use it 2 times, now we find the polypropylene package is equal to the performance of EPS on a climate change level. When we move to more than 3 times use, we find the polypropylene pack outperforms both EPS and a cardboard and compostable solution. And as you can see, this pack was designed to be used 12 times. So the longer it's in the system, the less impact it actually has. But if people are going on an anti-plastic campaign, they'll be focusing wedded on a single-use cardboard compostable option when they're actually missing the bigger picture if they change behaviour and have a reuse model behind it. So this is like the value of reuse in this method, and not necessarily judging, I guess, a book by its material cover in this particular case. So again, I won't show this onto the actual deck you've got, but again, the reuses are more powerful than recycling, or compostable by keeping the material value in the system, and therefore reducing the raw material input, and therefore the climate change over that time. Tying it up towards another system, which is a partner system here, is looking at the QSR level. Now, we've looked at retailers. Obviously, as brand owners, you're going directly to either a retailer or directly to customers. Here at QSR, we're talking McDonald's, your Starbucks and quick service restaurants. 70% of the package that they make is actually consumed off premise, which means they have no control or access to recycling. So it's very, very limited. And that's a huge problem because most of those items they produce are made from recyclable materials, but either because of high levels of food contamination or the fact that no one can actually get access to a recycling bin or a food compost bin, they're thrown in a landfill. So it's a huge impact for them and high levels of single-use product because it is a high turnover over the counter. So here we have competitors McDonald's and Starbucks joining forces with a consortium partnered by Closed Loop and other partners actually have invested interest in the success of this to actually address this problem. So here they teamed up to create a new sustainable cup to try and address single cups. They put in about $10 million into this plan back in 2018 to see what they could do. Basically ran a competition globally, had a number of shortlisted partners that put forward their own systems, their own models, but each one had a circular model and a unique system that played along that area. But the whole goal was to replace a single-use item. You fast forward to 2021, and this is their result. So they've got a circular cup, which they're looking now to expand across 30 countries across Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and recycling 450,000 cups. And essentially what they've done is collect paper cups through various collection chains. And again, there was an R cup, which I showed on a previous presentation with Dairy Australia. I didn't go for that today, but the same technology, and Nextech were also involved from Next Loop PP. So again, getting all these cups, breaking them up, melting them in with, again, recycled polypropylene. So again, that magical material, that plastic material, recompounded across to make essentially this reusable cup. And as they point out here, I've quoted this from their article, is reusable cups are a simpler way to cut back waste because they bypass the complex recycling system altogether. So if you can't control the system, get out of the system, and they're actually putting in a solution towards this. But again, it's a partner system here. We're involving competitors, we're involving technology providers, we're involving startups that have the IP and the passion and drive behind it, and we basically have venture capitalists actually bankrolling this. And again, none of these are locked in full-scale solution, but they're all testing out these hypotheses out at increasing scale to adopt them broadly and globally in the next 1 to 3 years. And again, Starbucks, again, looking at a similar type system, again, looking at that closed loop area, but actually having more freedom. So low-tech cups, not the hydro one we've just seen the previous one, but here again, you might have a simple reusable cup, essentially a polypropylene container that we'll produce. You have a deposit system, so a container deposit system in place, return the cup and you get a credit. But again, you can return that cup anywhere. And then once it's returned, there is a system back of house that does the cleaning. And that can be done while you're roaming around, so off premise, or it can be done when you're back at home through the Ridwell system as well. So again, partner with another partner to deliver that solution. So the wrap up, really taking some of those key outs, really asking yourself, which brand will you be? Are you going to be the greenwasher when you talk about sustainability and about contributing to a better world, but you make the knee-jerk reaction to things that you think consumers believe are sustainable, but not really when you look at the metrics? Or are you going to be a responsible brand? We start to look at the shared values beyond yourself, but working with others to deliver that solution. So I've shared some of the takeouts from the learnings that essentially McDonald's and Starbucks went through their system. So I've got a link to this quite deep deck. And I've just picked out a couple of slides here for your reference for the sake of the presentation. When we look at the system overall, this is something which, again, works on a circular model. Alan MacArthur has a plethora of these case studies around as well. It's getting it and actually adopting it to your particular market, your particular need, your particular brand, and your particular system that you might be able to get access to, and tailoring it to that need. But they all sort of fit around the same footprint. You want to make sure that whatever reuse model you put in place is net positive in the way it's actually addressing single-use packaging. So again, you can do a streamlined LCA like I've shown an example of to determine that. Or you can piggyback off the shoulders of giants and see what other people have done, like Heineken, and use that as an aspiration to what you might want to achieve. You want to make sure that a reuse model is hygienic, and never more has that been present with COVID. Some of these programs were delayed during COVID. Some have actually managed to keep going through the system. So again, each country has addressed it very differently, but in the end, hygiene is critical. So the back of house or third-party management of cleaning system is critical. You want to make sure it's seamless, frictionless, it blends in with your day-to-day life, and therefore it should be as easy as getting onto your phone and playing with an app. And in the end, all that requires collaboration. It's not about you. It might be the back of house, it might be the logistics and distribution, it might be with the manufacturer, it might be with other items, but it's in working that system all together. Second last slide here is then looking at that stakeholders, collaborate across the value chain, pull those parties together, look at that systematic infrastructure, those challenges. Again, we can't have industrial compostable packs in the market, we don't have infrastructure that supports it. We struggle with putting compostable packaging in our green waste bin, but don't have instructions to support it. So looking for those chinks in the system and trying to find ways to address it. And ideally test it out in the field, so stress test it, learn from it and put it back. All the examples I've shown you are testing it at pilot level to scale. And the last one here is around process. So again, some of the key insights there, and I'll show this on my, I think, 4th slide at the very start of the presentation, is that very key, first key step when you look at design thinking ethos is about empathy. Putting yourself in the context of the culture, the audience, the people engaging with your system, and see from their lens, from their eyes, and how they might influence change for your offer. Make sure you engage with policymakers, engage with people that set policy in motion, whether it's at an APCO level, whether it's a local council level, whether it's a state level, and making sure that there's gaps in that system which are going to have an impact to you doing the best job you can possibly do. You raise the flag. They're all working to the same agenda from that point of view. You map out what those key stakeholders are and how you might actually go to engage with each of them or those parties working together. Also a great way to identify the gaps to bring other parties involved to solve that. And we've seen that across the way with advanced recycling, Next Loop PP, and all those people working with collective groups. They've mapped it out as a starter point. And the last area there is understand the impact of the change you're making. Look at what you're doing right now, what impact you have versus where you want to go and what the end goal impact is going to be. As I've shown a couple of examples there already on reuse models, that reuse part is critical. It's not about the material choice or the widget, it's keeping that in system, in use, in active use and active service for as long as possible. And once you've got that in place, you know straight away the impact is negated by the amount of time you're using that particular product. So, final slide. If we continue with this linear economy, if we use a technical term, great little quote from John Elkington, we are literally totally screwed. And if that is not enough for you, I know from my point of view, if not for humanity, do it for love with family. So thank you very much. Any questions?
Thanks so much, Mike. There is a question there from Richard. Have you able to open your chat box?
Okay, yes, I've got it open. So thank you, Richard. Cracking presentation. Thanks, Richard. Do you think that in order to implement changes in packaging, in particular barriers, and barrier packaging I think you mentioned, there will need to be a change in the attitudes of the majors to shelf life, MLOR expectations? Short answer, yes. And I'm actually been personally having conversations around that level at the moment. And a lot of it stems down to legacy. And when I say that in legacy data, where they may have been having 12 to 18 months shelf life and has been for the last 10, 15, 20 years, why change? Now's the time to have that conversation. And the main reason why is all the retailers, Woolworths, Coles, Aldi, they all have in actions to look at their entire private label range and move them towards PrEP compliant. And as I've shown you already, I don't go ahead and throw the baby out with the bathwater, but part of that analysis, I understand they're going to have the same issues that you've come across with high functioning materials requiring high barrier and therefore non-recyclable materials. So they themselves have to make a compromise to be able to deliver to their promise that they've put out to their consumers that are attached to their brand values and their share price. So yes, now's a good time to have that conversation because all the private label owners will be having the same battle and are currently going through it and are trying to decipher which way forward between now and the next 2 to 3 years. Another question here from Jen. In previous packaging projects, have you liaised with food safety regulators? Imagine this would be a significant issue with dairy food packaging. Look, in the majority of cases, Jen, on that one, we're working with materials that already have all the compliance, material safety data sheets, FDA compliance, and so on. Where the challenge is now is when we start to look at the recycled components coming in. Now, where we had recycled packaging being used, it's been predominantly in secondary or tertiary packaging. So it's safe, it's not in direct contact with the food product. The challenge we've got, and certainly in this country, is that at LEAP we're going to be doing, where we're going with post-consumer recycled material, most likely having access to in contact with the food product. You'll notice some examples there where people are using either, I didn't include in this presentation, sorry, paper bottles from Pulpex or post-consumer recycled materials in bags as well as in bottles. They're used in personal home care. So where there isn't going to be human ingestion. I know there's been a bit of a battle in Europe in particular. I've spoken to a couple of vendors that actually produce the machines that process the polypropylene into a clean filtration system. So the aroma is taken out, taint's taken out to a virgin material. And the issue they've got there is obviously making sure that it meets FDA compliance. That is still a bit of a time lag. So that will become an issue over time in the next probably 18 months here in particular, as we start moving towards primary packaging, having a percentage of direct contact with post-consumer recycled material. Emma, can you please touch on how much virgin plastic is required in the recycling process? Depends, Emma, in what medium and what material. If I didn't put a slide in here from Ed Koiser from Next Loop PP, so he's from Next Tech. Check the link I've got on the slide. I'll take you to his website. There's a webinar that he has on that homepage. And about midway through, he actually has a table which talks about the recycled content and the impact on use. I know from my experience that we've had in regards to plastics, lawn would go to around about 35, 50% max. It starts to have some issues beyond that blend. Again, if I was to look at papers, they're probably capping around about 70, 80%. Because again, if you have too much short fibers in particular, you haven't got a strong bond or yield. So you want to have some virgin stock to balance things out. But every packaging medium has a different threshold. The process that is used also impacts that threshold. And the end requirement for that packaging medium will also impact that threshold. So it is variable and it is going to be a case-by-case requirement. But yeah, please check out the link on the webinar on Ed's slide. And there is a part he talks a bit about that in his presentation. He's a technical whiz when it comes to that, far smarter than me. Got through here as well. Annie Thompson, thanks for the presentation. Where can we find data of consumers' level of understanding in sustainable packaging? Any government support program available at the moment on educating the consumers on sustainable packaging? Look, I would reach out to the team at Planet Arc. They're basically the custodians of the ARL and that consumer action. And I believe they have done some traditional focus group as well as other surveys to measure that. I didn't use it on this presentation. I did have another link on a different slide, which related to some findings, but they were all out of the UK and Europe. But locally, I would recommend you reaching out to Planet Arc. You can, if you're an APCO member, you go via APCO. Lily Barnett will probably be able to help you out there, and she probably keeps you with the right person on that side. And Richard, are you happy with us sharing the PDF copy of your press with others in our organisation? Yes, yeah, they can feel free to give me a call and berate me if they wish. That's fine. I'll put myself out there. So that should be okay, Richard. Emma, in the reuse model, isn't there a requirement for recycling, especially WRT, damaged labels, etc.? I'm thinking of a few of these selling household cleaning items that don't necessarily disclose how much they have to repack. Not quite sure what that one's meaning on that one, Emma. Might have to get back to you on that one.
Emma, if you'd like to unmute, you're welcome and explain your question.
Have we lost Emma? Yeah.
Oh, I think she's coming. Emma, can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Surprise,
hello.
it's not Emma, it's Nicole.
Surprise.
Thanks, Michael. We're all really interested in I guess this sort of shtick with regards to packaging, et cetera, and I personally have done a lot of research, which, you know, is pretty confusing on these systems, different models,
yep,
et cetera.
Yep. Yep.
And we're very small, I should add. We're not large at all. But I guess my concern is the transparency factor in this space with regards to a few companies that take the reuse model and sell it to the consumer in a fashion that is perhaps not truly representative of what it actually is. So I asked a question around virgin plastics because there are a couple of people in the marketplace who aren't mentioning the sheer volume of virgin plastic being reintroduced to their ocean waste, plastic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a very, very fickle and funny space to work in. And I guess with you and your expertise, I'm just curious to know realistically around the reuse model, how much of it? I mean, for me as a business, I don't want a piece of packaging, irrespective of my business model, going out to market with a damaged label because it's been reused. So therefore, there has to be some kind of process in the reuse model whereby that damaged packaging, when it's picked up and cleaned and refilled, is sorted into, okay, we need to ditch that and start again,
Correct.
so to speak.
Correct. So in that particular case, and again, I think it was on the second last slide, which I had on about empathy and about understanding your own unique circle. Yes, where you target accordingly. I'll give you an example of one client I've worked with. They're small. It's called Oasis Bakery. They own basically 2 outlets. Started off as in a cafe. They've got now they've got their own retail store, but on a small footprint. We designed a spice shaker for them, which was designed for refillability and reuse, and it's labelled, and the label acted as the tamper evidence. So you bring back the pack, you get a small deposit back, which you have to sort of again adjust because of COVID. But essentially, they took on the responsibility of delabeling that product and making sure the adhesive that we chose for that pack enabled to easily come off without leaving residue on the pack, and therefore they could clean it, reuse the item, and put a fresh label on there. And that label then itself, when it's crunched up, can be recycled in the paper stream. So again, you look, if you go through that circularity program, and I'd recommend going onto the Alan MacArthur website. You've probably been through it, and there's actually a few circularity guys that IDEO worked through, and one of them was looking at the material flow journey and the journey map. And then you map out what you're looking at, and those particular points, you're correct. Some brands would have issues with it, and they try and gloss over it. And
Totally.
and if you're true to what you're trying to achieve, then you identify those areas as pain points and you address a solution for each of them. And in that particular case with the labels, so again, you want to make sure you've got an adhesive that is removable easily, that if it is put in the paper stream is actually palpable and then delivers to that particular job. And that, again, the system of return, getting deposit, having that cleaned and so on, is actually accounted for in the overall model. And it may be done purely for, the way your brand has a purpose, but it may be also done on a commercial basis. And to be honest, this is where I made the point about field testing these things, because you won't know until you actually do it. So there is no silver bullet. There is no one model you copy across everything. You do have to go out there, get your fingers burned, and then learn from that, but make adjustments. And with regards to the ocean plastic one, great example. I still have my Method bottle, which has the ocean plastics label from about 10, 12 years ago, because TerraCycle, with Tom Scarzi founded, they used to collect the plastic off the coast of California and use that as a vehicle to sell that brand. That was out pushing the whole premise. But to the point about the recycling, the ocean plastics are that degraded in quality, you do have to light up a fair bit of virgin to give it the melt flow index to mold the part. So yes, it does have ocean plastic in there, but there's no way that's 100% ocean plastics. Its degradation level would just be atrocious, not to mention the aroma issues. So there's always a balance between it, and that falls under the greenwash, the puffery, and that gets my blood boiling, especially when I see things like this. I kept this cup. This is I'm not paper cup, but that looks like paper, okay? And it says it's plastic free. You may not see it here, but there's a nice little lining in here, which basically is a bit reflective. I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera here, but that basically is actually a plastic coating, dispersion coating. But they make the claim of plastic free. And of course, APCO have done a potability trial, and non-tree fibers cause problems in the paper mill. So they're actually now looking at the gas and other, sugar cane, other type of fibers to actually, at the moment, under technical review, under the TAC group, on the technical advisory committee reviewing those materials, and they may actually be classed as a non-conforming material for recycling. So I think it's paper. It looks like paper. It feels like paper. I can't read that unless I've got my glasses on, because the font's pretty crap, and I have to go ahead and I'm going to put this in the recycling bin. And in the end, that's not going to be recycled. So there is a complete challenge there. I 100% agree with you. And our job is to, again, try and weed it out. And things like the ARL is a tool we can use, and certainly addressing and calling out those brands that are making greenwashing claims but not backing it up with science.
Yeah, I think some investigative journalists have already taken up that charge, but thank you very much. I could talk to you about this forever and ever, but I'm acutely aware that there are many other people in the room.
So you got my details on
Sorry,
so yeah.
don't
Thanks,
have
Michael.
to finish up. Yeah, just want to thank you, Michael, so much for all the effort you've put into today. I know it's been a lot of work for you, and hopefully everybody has got a lot out of it. And Michael's got his contact details there if you want to contact him. So with that, I'll just stop the recording.